Let's just record. All right, so I am trying my damnedest right now to figure out Colin Farouz. That's who that guy is. Farrell Farouz. I'm trying my damnedest to figure out because Tech Ingredients happened to release a video today about their cheap panel solution for removing heat in an active cooling capacity way. And my first idea was a vapor chamber design that happens to use a small little toy Stirling engine to create a compression effect for the vapor and a flow effect for the vapor chamber when it's already a thermosiphon setup design. So that way it would still allow for it to cool and then be able to create a more active flow from that using the energy that's already there in the refrigerant for the vapor. It's going to start off as a liquid anyways because it comes in a compressed can liquid thing. But then I was like, that's not a very good design. It's not very efficient. You'd have to know a thing or two about welding. It's not simple. It's not a simplistic design. And so like my another initial thought was pretty simplistic again as well, where I pretty much again just used a thermosiphon idea in a basin that happens to use a rising effect for the liquid turning into a gas to turn a turbine, which will then be attached to a basic fan inside of a housing that still creates the flow. Because rising effects still create what they do, which is motion, and then I can capture that with a basic ass bitch fan, stacked on itself a few times over. And because it's going into a larger basin, and then you get your other reservoir, then a bunch of lines, which is like an air-to-air exchange for a turbo, which isn't cheap. So it's like, oh yeah, no, this isn't cheap. This isn't actually that efficient. It totally works. It just, you need a knowledge a little bit more than what most people probably have. And I figured that wouldn't be worth it. But the more of an array you have doing this, meaning more than just one panel, the more likely the effect becomes actually worth it. So there's that. But it's not very good. So I've been standing around thinking about how to fucking create a better version that is better, for the lack of a better word. And I was like, radiative cooling. And I was like, oh no, you have to buy that stuff and everything else. And it's actually not that much. In terms of like heat value here that you have to concentrate to be able to create, and then there's electricity, blah 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 blah. It's just not actually that efficient. And so the standard heat sink methodology is really really efficient for what it is, and he's actively cooling it by having a regular radiative design, meaning he stuck some radiators on the back of his panel. And he uses 3 watts total from PC all-weather fans to effectively make that airflow go over it. And, the other design of, I'll just pump water to the top of my roof was, like, kind of stupid to me. I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to be as good as you want it to be at all. First off, that takes a lot of energy to pump water to your roof. And then you have to store it, because you want that heat, right? But then it's like, as it goes down, you can get a little bit of that energy back. Like best turbines here, all really expensive or not that efficient. We're talking 40% efficiency for a fucking gravity battery, because it's like you have to store that. That's a gravity battery, that's all that is. It's a heavy mass that's traveling through and flowing through a tube, which is the same thing as any heavy water mass battery. And so like that's all that is. And so a lot of mass on my roof doesn't sound like a good idea to me. So I feel like that's not a very good idea, and then you're losing energy doing that. Then you get rain, and I suppose over time you could build up a massive water basin. And that wouldn't be very good, because then you have a massive amount of water on top of your roof. So I just don't feel like that's a worthwhile design at all. So that one was the reason why I was like, okay, so this is actually a challenging aspect. We're talking about minimal amounts of energy, maybe 100 degrees Celsius over the course of, I don't know, a few hours, maybe a whole day. But it doesn't really matter, because, like, it's more... Now I'm recording, of course. I don't know what happened there. So there's that now that I have to deal with. Fucking recording decided to cut out. But, here, maybe this would be better. Don't really have a stand, so to speak. So anyways, I don't. I'm using a wallet and a TV right now to create some sort of an effect like this. So that's wonderful. And the lights behind me, so my face is all shadowy. Yeah, great. There we go. It's a better way to do this. Give me a second. Because you're the camera, so you're coming with me no matter what. So low-grade waste heat has been a thing that, scientists, engineers, and more have been trying to figure out a way to be useful for us for a very long period of time. And so, this is a very interesting phenomenon and conundrum to think about. And so, that's one of the reasons why I'm like, okay, so, how would I do this as cheaply and as efficiently as possible for anyone to really do? Because I like the design. It's a decent design. Still got my bed head. Can't get rid of that. I need to take a shower on that. Anyways. So, I've been racking my brain trying to come up with something. Because I'm like, okay, well, thermosiphon works. Vapor chamber thermosiphon works. It's not a bad idea. It works really rather well. And you can just use the air current. And then when it gets hot enough, you can store a little bit of electricity in a battery. And basically turn a fan, an active fan. That blows across the vapor chamber, only when necessary. Otherwise, you don't really need it. You know what I mean? You just don't. But that's for professionals to be able to make. Typically, those are low pressure liquid. And then my idea of turning a three-piece low-pressure liquid, which is a soda bubble, a supercritical, and a low-pressure fluid, that will readily change into a vapor, like water, and then a supercritical fluid that's inside of that water that is supercritical because of the pressure it's under, and it's mixed with the water under that pressure. And then you have the soda bubble. And typically that's usually some sort of refrigerant of some kind. Compound that's with the water, and then for the supercritical, and then soda bubble water, that's like nitrogen or something. If it's under the low enough pressure, it'll just bubble out. And I'm like, well, no, it slowly over time, but when you recompress it, it goes back to doing that whole effect of being a soda bubble. So it's a thermosiphon for the solar panel. And so it expands more readily, more quickly, more thermally efficiently. And that's a very good idea. but it's not very user friendly. This guy's trying to make it so that way you can actually use it for like regular people. That's kind of a thing that they're doing, that kind of thing. And so I'm like, okay, so how do I fucking make this better? And I love my thermal siphon with like a little bit of activity as a result of some sun and some heat from the refrigerant to create a Stirling engine benefit. That's waste heat that gets used to actually benefit. Then there's like radiative cooling, and that's expensive for what it is, and then you'd have to run it through, and you still have to run the damn pump. And so then I started getting into like, well, I have a windmill, I have a Stirling pump, and it's like, oh my god, this is actually way more expensive and way more trouble than it's worth. No one's going to really probably ever do that. So like that was garbage as a result. It's total shit in every way. So I was trying to think of racking my brain, and I'm still doing it. You get to see the process. How the hell I come up with some of my ideas. Because it's like, okay, so what do I know? And it's like, I'm trying to use light. And I'm like, light's garbage as a way to remove heat. Because you need to convert it. Heat is not always light. It's vibrational effects. So if I could tune a resonant frequency of those vibrational effects into a given source of concentration, and then take that, which is a ultrasonic vibrational coolant, active cooler, which takes the panel, it vibrates it at a very particular frequency, and then it concentrates it into the middle, and then you use a regular thermal siphon, you get cooling, you get active cooling. Fairly cheaply, fairly efficiently, but it's not exactly easy. You know what I mean? Like you kind of don't really have something there when it comes down to ease of use, creation, and easy to know, and all the rest of that stuff. So that's a thing. Like most people aren't probably gonna fucking be able to make that for themselves. So sorry. Hunk of refined stone, aluminum, equal good, easy. But they're very expensive, and they're not that efficient. If we're being honest, they're not. Like, the thinner the metal, the more efficient it becomes at transferring heat. But then also, it's like, actually speaking, you need air to run over it. So, it's not that efficient. It's just the problem. That's why he had to create his own. It's just like, okay, so most people are going to suddenly have their costs for this apparatus to increase. I'm not trying to best him. It's just an interesting puzzle I decided to think about. That's all that is. I'm like, how the fuck would I do it? How the fuck would I do this? Like, this is the problem with low grade heat. It's not very efficiently turned into anything most often. Or concentratable, usually. But I think I have something. It's bubbling in the mind. Because it's like, okay, so I know about this idea of light. I know this idea of polarization, vibrational collapse, combination, amplitude increase, light stuff, And then I'm like, right, but that's effectively the same thing I can use if I make a tube with like gas going through it. I create a vibrational frequency effect that then, like a muffler here, tunes the frequency, it removes other frequencies, and it collapses those frequencies into the one main frequency. And so it's like, okay, see what's going on, could you use that? And it's like, okay, well, no, it's not very user friendly. I'm heading somewhere with it. Just give me a second. No, I like the fan shroud idea. Just stick a fan shroud, like a ram air intake into the wind. Just have it be, moved around by a weather vane. Stick some heat sinks on it, right? But it's like, hey, that's really efficient. Why wouldn't you do that? And I'm like, that's a lot of fucking money. That's why. I want it cheap as fuck. That's why. You know how expensive heat sinks are? That guy was making his own with a shop because his buddy has like a fucking shaver. I just don't want to do that. It's not worth it. How is it? How is it? How is it? How is it? It's like, okay, so I can make a thermosiphon design. That's simple enough. It's honestly very, very simple to make a thermosiphon. It's like you run a bunch of fucking, thermal epoxy with an old radiator from a AC unit. You hook it up to a thicker tube, bigger tube from a smaller tube at the top, lay it flat. And then you have like a cone that goes into the smaller tube, from that big tube to the small tube. You braze weld it, and then pretty much that's good to go at that point. It's a thermosiphon, vapor chamber, but it's not very good. And most people would probably want that, I'd imagine, in a different capacity. Than what they would probably be using, because of course it needs to go down, and then it needs to travel up, and then it needs to go to the radiator, and then it needs to go back down. Pretty simple design. It would work rather efficiently, but it's not very easy, to do. I think cheap-wise, though, it works rather well. You can find a bunch of AC units anywhere, and thicker tube copper is not that hard. That's a refrigerator tube from a AC condenser tube. That kind of a thing. And like that would work out rather well. The problem is like you have to compress it. So you need to keep it all the same tube size. And it's like, yes, well, not really though. You don't really want to do that. Typically. In fact, you don't want it to be a snaking tube design either. You want it to be straight lines from a larger, then it goes through and then to a larger reservoir. As it lost energy, it wants to recondense back into becoming a liquid. But, there's thermal constraints with any design like that, because you have the sun, you have rain, you have winter, you have all the rest of it. So it's not very efficient. Alright. But it would be cheap for certain climates to make. Still enjoy my coffee. Let me pause this, I'll be back. Alright, so, just some thinking, about 5 minutes, roughly. Fucking around with things. I figured out that, there's a way to collapse those light waves into, an actual concentrated manner. And then use that as a thermal siphon pump. Which, if you're not aware, that just means a heatsink kind of looking thing and a chamber that then goes off over here into another chamber that then goes up, and then, that's your radiator. Which is fairly cheap, actually. It's some ducting, essentially, in the right shape. So as it goes through and it creates an IR and so on, light waves, because typically IR is what you're looking for. you vibrate molecules and then they thermally conductively rise, creating a thermosiphon effect as they travel through the ducting, which is effectively all I'm doing. It's a pretty simple design. I don't need it to go through a radiator style. In fact, that's the opposite. I'm really only looking for one area to be cooled. It's a good way to put this. I need to describe this better for people that might not understand what I'm saying. So resonant frequencies of IR are very powerful. And when you happen to effectively create a pattern on a heatsink that is in line, okay, so like typically what we're going to talk about with this is not circular or fins. In fact, you wouldn't do any of that. You would just place certain filters of, what do you call this? Like it's like a lens, but it's not a lens. It's a series of slots, like a quantum, slot experiment. And it goes through, it spreads, it diffuses. Give your bell curve kind of thing. But that's the observation and light thing, which is like, I don't really want to get into that. But the point I'm trying to make is IR is good. And in fact, you have other light waves that are passing through. And so when you set up the correct slots and grooves on the outside, which is a filter, okay, so it's more of a lens, because it's going to resonant frequency collapse your light. Because it's like you got one wavelength, you got another wavelength, and then they are one big wavelength. Amplitude collapse effectively for your light. But you're concentrating it in a focal manner. And so like you wouldn't really use this without basically just creating a sheet of metal that is... It's a good way to put that, because it's a sheet of metal that all you're doing is putting some slots in it. I mean that. That's literally all it is. It's a certain specificity of slot size, and then as light waves travel, they create a polarizational effect, but then also a diffusal effect. But you see, on the other side, you're going to have your little tiny heat sinks. But you don't really need heat sinks, really, because you bent your slots in. So like you're going to puncture it, and then you're going to bend them out, which is a heat sink now for your sheet of aluminum. And because it bounces back and forth off of that, and then that tries to hit a specific distance off of your solar panel, you're going to end up ultimately getting a resonant frequency that bounces itself back and forth, that also then passes through the slots, that then diffuse, that then collapse themselves together to create a bigger wave amplitude frequency of IR. Now, as a result of doing this, if you shine it in a duct, a tube, with the right grooves along the slide, which typically are just straight lines in a flower pattern, that kind of thing, it tends to directionalize your light and coherent it, and focus it towards the center and forwards directionality. Then you'll have that go into a chamber, which has the air, whatever air you're looking for. I don't give a fuck, truthfully, it's just air. There isn't any specificity to the air. As far as I'm concerned, it means nothing. Okay? The air just needs to rise. But in order to do that, it needs to vibrate something with that light. Okay? And it doesn't need to be a very long tube. We're talking like 5 inches total tube length. And then it's like, all right, so what's this? And it's like, all right, so I'm a fucking stupid dummy dumb, because like everyone is, really. I've got a baker sheet, as far as I'm concerned. I don't give a fuck. It's steel. As far as I'm concerned, it's steel. You know, it could be a literal sheet of steel that you bent a bunch of times, and now you've got a heat sink. And a reflectivity piece of aluminum sheet. You got your steel sheet, and you got your aluminum sheet, and you got your little box. As the rising convection of air goes up, then you have your it's a fucking stupid ass heatsink again. But it's not really heatsink. You know what I mean? Because like, hey, what do you know? You can use the power of the air around you. You don't get it. Like, I don't need anything other than our atmosphere. I don't need to siphon it around, except it'll draw in air as it convects up, as it heats up this plate, and then it draws it through. And so it goes up and it goes through, and it's like a chimney constantly going on. It's just underneath, it goes up, whoosh. You get it? It's all I have to do. It's all anyone has to do to make this as simple as possible. It's a heat sink, but it's a very specific type of heat sink. It's a radiative heat sink. That's a vapor heat sink that isn't a vapor heat sink because there is no vapor in the chamber, except for our atmosphere. That's all that is. And that would be the most simplistic design I would come up with. I don't even need much to make it work, technically. I just need like the little sheet of 5 inches length. You can play around with it, but like 5 inches of length, and then you've got like your little slots on the inside that tend to like make it look, the diagonals, and you got that, and that's so that way you get your flower pattern. And that's just a coherenter, but it isn't really a coherenter. It's, again, just aluminum, not very hard to make. You can bend it and then box it. And then you have your sheet steel that you bent, you poked, bent, and then you've got your aluminum sheet, and Bob's your uncle, basically. It's pretty simple. It should work brilliantly as what it does. All it is a resonant frequency chamber acting like the idea in its mind, quantumly speaking, I guess. I don't really give a shit. Whatever they want to phrase it as. To me, it's just a light chamber that I'm using to bounce itself, to radiate and then cool off faster in a very controlled, simplified manner that makes it work far faster. That's all that is. And it works out to be pretty efficient. It should, anyways, with less outright amounts of work involved. It doesn't take much to make it, I would imagine, for most people, at all. It's bending some sheet steel and sheet aluminum, which is ducting, if you don't know. That's why I said ducting. Like a sheet aluminum is usually they use for ducting. So, but that's all it is. It's a series of slots that you bend out, and then like that allows for a coherented light that then spreads and diffuses together after traveling a certain distance, which gives you a very specified polarizational quantum slot experiment effect that tends to collapse the middle of that inwards to a larger amplitude. And then that as well will tend to spread out as it bounces out into the flower pattern sheath. It's only like 5 inches. As that goes and spreads out, which it'll spread quite quickly, it reflects back in, and then it creates a resonance frequency collapse state for the polarizational amplitude coherenter, I guess is what that would be called. Which, for reference, creates a directionality amplitude wave for the light that is IR, potentiating it quite significantly. Because of that constant reflectivity, while it's technically not getting hotter, it does stay a certain frequency, and so you need to be able to balance that basically as like in the amount of holes and light, and it's going to need to be more towards the center than the outside. What that does is it creates this oscillative resonant frequency, which is what they use for like some quantum computer thing, where they shine a laser light and they basically vibrate at a particular frequency, so that way the quantum, superposition lasts a little longer and it has less noise involved in it. And so that effectively makes it so that way it'll pulse together with this IR and a higher amplitude already. And but also it happens to do this wonderful chamber effect. It's a resonant chamber effect. And so any resonance of light inside of a chamber that is allowed to escape in a given area will do so in a very coherent fashion, just like a laser. So there you go. It's a laser IR effect that happens to be able to essentially dump its energy into something over distance very efficiently.